Hello, and welcome to Oak Island Theories. In this video, we're going to explore the theory that a 17th century conspiracy to overthrow the King of Britain lies at the heart of the Oak Island mystery. Let's take a look.
In their 2013 book, Oak Island and Its Lost Treasure, The Untold Story of the British Military's Role in the Island Flood Tunnel, Canadian mining engineers Graham Harris and Les MacPhie propose that the money pit was first excavated by the crew of a New English treasure hunter turned government official named William Phips. William Phips was born to a large, poor family in Kennebec River, a frontier settlement in present-day Maine, on February 2, 1651. His father died when he was 6 years old, and consequently he was forced to shepherd the family's sheep flock at a young age in order to help support his mother and many siblings. When he was 18, Phips left his very large family and traveled to Boston, where he apprenticed as a shipwright. After completing his apprenticeship, he worked in the city as a shipwright for some time, marrying Mary Spencer Hull, a wealthy Boston widow, in 1674 before taking his trade to Sheepscot River, a community near his hometown. In the summer of 1676, Phips finished building his first large merchant ship, with which he planned to haul a load of lumber to Boston. Before he could take his new ship on its maiden voyage, however, a war party of Wabanaki braves raided the Sheepscot River settlement. New England at that time was embroiled in a brutal conflict with Acadian natives called King Philip's War, King Philip being the nickname of a prominent Wampanoag war chief. Instead of loading up the lumber as planned, Phips took the entire population of the settlement and shipped them off to the safety of Boston, leaving behind Sheepscot River and his career as a shipwright. This act, while financially ruinous, earned the young colonist great acclaim in that corner of New England. In Boston, Phips began a new career as a merchant. For some time, he used his own vessel to ship goods all along the Atlantic coast, from New England to Acadia to Newfoundland. Eventually, his mercantile exploits took him as far south as the Caribbean, where, in various port taverns, he heard stories of sunken Spanish treasure ships, the skeletons of which lay scattered throughout the archipelago, their lost cargo just waiting to be recovered. In the early 1680s, Phips abandoned his mercantile enterprise and sailed to the Bahamas, hoping to discover sunken Spanish treasure ships and recover the valuables therein. Apparently, he was modestly successful and quickly earned a reputation as a proficient treasure hunter. After failing to convince potential New English backers to outfit him for a more rigorous treasure hunt, Phips sailed to England and appealed to Sir John Narborough, Rear Admiral and Commissioner of the British Royal Navy. Narborough agreed to invest in Phips's Caribbean treasure hunting expedition provided King Charles II sanctioned it. Narborough managed to convince the king to sponsor the expedition, and, incredibly, Phips, a poor New Englander with no military experience, was made captain of the HMS Rose of Algerie, an 18-gun man-of-war, and granted a commission to search for treasure in the Bahama Islands. Phips's first government-sanctioned treasure hunting expedition in the Bahamas met with modest success. Before the merchant-turned-captain could return to England to relay the news to the king, however, Charles II suffered a stroke and died on February 2, 1685. The late king was promptly succeeded by his brother James II, a staunch Catholic. At that time, the vast majority of Britons were Protestant, predominantly Anglican and Puritan. James II's Catholicism and his policy of religious tolerance towards Catholics raised the hackles of a number of Protestant parliamentarians, some of whom secretly plotted to have him overthrown. Later that same year, Sir John Narborough, the English Rear Admiral who had helped finance Phips's first expedition to the Caribbean, began organizing a second one. Narborough entreated the support of Christopher Monk, 2nd Duke of Albemarle, a hard-drinking English soldier and politician, and a pioneer of modern bare-knuckle boxing. Monk enticed a number of English aristocrats to invest in Phips's venture, while Phips set about acquiring and furnishing the James and Mary, a 22-gun frigate, and the Henry of Lincoln, a 45-ton sloop, to replace the Rose of Algerie. On September 12, 1686, Phips and his ships set sail for the Bahamas. That January, while Phips and the James and Mary were reprovisioning in Samana Bay, Hispaniola, the crew of the smaller Henry of London explored a submerged bank to the northwest, which was known as the Ambrosia Bank at the time. This submerged bank now bears the name Silver Bank, for reasons which will soon become obvious. After spending only 2 days in the area, the crew discovered the wreck of the Nuestra Señora de Pura y Limpia Concepcion, a huge 36-cannon Spanish treasure galleon which had, on account of a storm, crashed into a Bahamian reef and sank on October 31st, 1641, bringing its precious cargo with it to the bottom of the sea. A handful of First Nations freedivers aboard the Henry of London managed to recover several silver bars and several thousand silver coins from the wreck, the bottom of which was located 45 feet below the surface of the water. The crew returned to inform Phips of the find, and in the ensuing months, Phips's men salvaged over 34 tons of silver from the Concepcion, which amounted to 202,536 British pounds sterling, about 5.22 million Canadian dollars in today's currency. Phips and his crew sailed back to England with their massive haul, where they presented King James II with a significant portion of the treasure. The king made Phips a knight for his service to the crown, and appointed him to Provost Marshal of New England before sending him and his 2 ships, along with a supplement of 4 new ships, back to the site of the Concepcion to recover the rest of the treasure. According to some reports, Phips, for reasons unknown, appeared to be reluctant to return to the site of the shipwreck. When Phips's small fleet arrived at the site of the wreck in December 1687, the Englishmen purportedly found the place crawling with treasure hunters. The Caribbean colonists scuttled off in their ships well before the 5 well-armed warships came within cannon range, ostensibly taking the treasure they had recovered with them. Phips and his crew carried out their treasure hunt, but to little avail. In total, the Englishmen were able to retrieve a paltry 470 pounds of silver, a far cry from the massive take of the earlier expedition. According to Phips and crew's collective logbooks, the reason for this low haul was twofold. Firstly, the portion of treasure that was readily accessible had already been retrieved by the other treasure hunters who had visited the wreck in their absence. Secondly, the remainder of the treasure, which according to Graham Harris and Les MacPhie comprised the vast majority of the treasure, which was located in the stern of the wrecked ship, was inaccessible at the time, being entombed in impenetrable coral. In February 1688, Phips and his treasure hunters, while still fishing for gold and silver at the site of the sunken Concepcion, were visited by a small armada from Holland. This fleet, composed of Dutch men of war, was headed by Charles Mordaunt, 3rd Earl of Peterborough, a fiery English expatriate, nobleman, and military commander who, as a young man in the 1670s, had fought under the command of Sir John Narborough against Moorish corsairs of the Barbary coast. Mordaunt had once been an active politician in England and had vigorously opposed James, the brother of the late King Charles II and heir to the English throne. When Charles II died and James II ascended the throne, Mordaunt fled the country and sought political asylum in Holland. There he joined the court of William III, where he continually implored the Dutch monarch to invade England. Apparently, Mordaunt had taken a break from his courtly duties that winter to visit the wreck of the Concepcion. On May 8, 1688, Phips left the wreck site and sailed to Boston in order to assume his new position as Provost Marshal of New England. Interestingly, Charles Mordaunt and his Dutch men of war departed on the same day. 3 weeks later, Sir John Narborough, Phips's longtime backer and Mordaunt's one-time commander, who was left in charge of the treasure hunt, came down with a fever and died. Phips arrived in Boston in the spring of 1688. After only a 6-week stay, in which he visited his wife and was sworn into office, he set sail for England under mysterious circumstances. Records indicate that Phips was definitely in England in August and September 1688, and in January, February, and March 1689. Aside from those dates, however, Phips's whereabouts remain a mystery. In the time that elapsed between those 2 dates, a momentous event occurred. In the fall of 1688, William III invaded England with a fleet of 600 ships and 40,000 soldiers. In the incident known as the Glorious Revolution, the Protestant Dutch monarch, with help from anti-Catholic parliamentarians, overthrew King James II. In the spring of 1689, William III assumed the English throne, becoming William III of England, Scotland, and Ireland. The deposed King James II, on the other hand, fled to France, where he and his descendants were thereafter known in England as the Jacobite Pretenders. By the time Phips returned to Boston on May 29, 1689, to resume his responsibilities as Provost Marshal of New England, the turmoil that had gripped Europe had already spilled over into North America. The administrators of New France saw this period of English instability as an opportunity to strike New England, their colonial rival to the south, and take control of the North American fur trade. Accordingly, they encouraged their Wabanaki First Nations allies to raid New English border settlements to the south. In retaliation, New Englanders armed their warlike Iroquois allies with muskets and steel tomahawks and encouraged them to attack new French settlements to the north. This particular conflict between New France and New England and their respective First Nations allies is known as King William's War. In April 1690, New English colonists decided to launch a military expedition against the new French colony of Acadia. Phips, despite his complete lack of military experience, was appointed to lead the expedition. The ex-treasure hunter led a small fleet of 7 ships, manned by several hundred militiamen, from Boston to Port Royal, the capital of Acadia, situated in what is now southwestern Nova Scotia on the shores of the Bay of Fundy. The new English militiamen found the French fort almost completely defenseless. A French military engineer tasked with expanding Port Royal was in the process of dismantling the fort's palisades, and as a result, none of the bastion's cannons were mounted. To make matters worse, the fort's 90 defenders were equipped with a total of 19 muskets. The new Frenchmen surrendered to the New Englanders without a shot being fired. Phips and his new English militiamen ransacked Port Royal, appropriating a sizable take of plunder before returning to Boston. Following that success, the New Englanders decided to launch a larger expedition against Quebec, the capital of New France. Once again, William Phips was tasked with leading this expedition. In the fall of 1690, Phips set out from Boston with 32 ships and 2,300 militiamen. After an 8-week voyage up the Atlantic coast and the St. Lawrence River, during which Phips and company stopped to pillage a number of French settlements, the new English fleet reached Quebec. Phips dispatched an envoy to the stronghold, demanding its surrender. Louis de Bouade, Comte de Frontenac, the Governor-General of New France and commander of the fort, boldly replied, "I have no reply to make to your general, other than from the mouths of my cannons." After some deliberation, Phips launched a 2-pronged assault on Quebec, which was repulsed by the new French defenders. Soundly defeated, the New Englanders beat a hasty retreat back to Boston. In 1691, Phips sailed to England to seek support for a second assault on Quebec. His request was denied, and after spending a year abroad, he returned to New England as governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Throughout his term as governor, which was punctuated by the infamous Salem witch trials, Phips, as all politicians inevitably do, made a number of powerful enemies, many of whom despised him for his lack of formal education, his rough frontier demeanor, and his disdain for rigid protocol. In the fall of 1694, he was recalled to England to defend himself against accusations levied against him by these enemies. While in England, he suddenly fell ill with a fever and died on February 28, 1695. In their book, Oak Island and Its Lost Treasure, Graham Harris and Les MacPhie weave a colorful, complex tapestry of conspiracy, intrigue, and circumstantial historical evidence, placing William Phips at the heart of a 17th century English conspiracy behind the deposition of a king and the mystery of Oak Island. The 17th century English conspiracy that Harris and MacPhie maintain was the impetus behind the creation of Oak Island's underground workings revolves around Charles Mordaunt, 3rd Earl of Peterborough. Born in 1658, Lord Mordaunt was an English nobleman and soldier who, after fighting against the Barbary corsairs of North Africa in the 1670s, became an active politician in the English court. Throughout his political career, Mordaunt was a vocal opponent of Prince James, a staunch Catholic and brother of the British King Charles II. When Charles II died on February 2, 1685, and Prince James was crowned King James II, Mordaunt fled to the Netherlands, where he was granted a place at the court of the Dutch monarch William III, Prince of Orange. For years, Mordaunt begged the Dutch sovereign, a Protestant, to invade England and depose James II from the throne. According to some accounts, he also routinely made secret trips to England where, after slipping by the royal customs officers who would likely arrest him on sight, he fomented rebellion. Mordaunt was not the only Englishman who wished to see James II ousted from the throne. A number of English parliamentarians hoped to see him deposed as well. According to Harris and MacPhie, one of these Britons was Sir John Narborough, Rear Admiral and Commissioner of the British Royal Navy, a man who, while serving Charles II, helped William Phips get the royal seal of approval for his first government-sanctioned treasure hunting expedition in the Caribbean. In 1685, Narborough set about organizing Phips's second treasure hunting expedition, and convinced Christopher Monk, 2nd Duke of Albemarle, a hard-drinking English soldier and aristocrat who also wished to see a Protestant on the English throne, to invest in it heavily. When William Phips returned to England from his treasure hunting expedition in 1688 with a huge take of silver from the Concepcion, Mordaunt reached out to Narborough and Monk, offering them the chance to take political matters into their own hands. Mordaunt suggested to the two men that Narborough might accompany Phips to the wreck of the Concepcion, retrieve the rest of the treasure, and donate it to the Dutch sovereign William III, so that he might use it to finance an invasion of England. In order to pull the wool over the eyes of King James II, Phips, Narborough, and all the officers in their treasure-hunting fleet would write in their logbooks that most of what remained of the Concepcion treasure had been looted by local Caribbean sailors, and that the rest was encased in impenetrable coral. Meanwhile, Monk would attempt to secure for himself the position of governor of Jamaica, so that he might use his power to keep British ships away from the wreck of the Concepcion. Narborough and Monk agreed to take part in Mordaunt's treasonous scheme. Narborough made himself the leader of Phips's next expedition, while Monk somehow convinced James II to make him governor of Jamaica. The last link in the chain was William Phips himself. After King James II knighted him, making him the first native New Englander to bear the honorific prefix Sir, and awarded him the office of Provost Marshal of New England, Phips was loath to oppose the English crown. According to Harris and MacPhie, one particular incident swayed him to accept Narborough and Mordaunt's treasonous proposal. Legend has it that when Phips presented King James II with the treasure of the Concepcion, the king granted the treasure hunter one wish as an additional reward for his services to the crown. When Phips requested the return of the charter to Massachusetts, James II laughed and said, "Anything but that." Back in 1688, James II had revoked the new English colonies' rights to self-governance and amalgamated them into a single dominion of New England, which was ruled by the British crown. According to Harris and MacPhie, this was enough to convince Phips to throw in his lot with Narborough and Mordaunt. Phips and Narborough carried out Mordaunt's scheme to the letter, returning to the site of the Concepcion, retrieving what remained of the treasure, and writing in their logbooks that the majority of the treasure remnants had been carried off by looters, and that the remainder was inaccessible. In February, they were visited by Mordaunt himself, who came to oversee the treasure hunt along with a company of Dutch men of war. Mordaunt had the treasure separated into silver coins, which William III could readily use to hire soldiers and purchase materials for his future invasion, and heavier silver bars and other miscellaneous treasure which would be given to the Dutch monarch at a later time. On May 8, 1688, Phips left the site of the wreck, his ship laden with silver bars and other less liquid treasure assets. Mordaunt and his frigates, which were loaded up with silver coins, accompanied him, their combined strength serving as a deterrent to Atlantic pirates. After sailing to Boston and remaining there for 6 weeks, Phips sailed to Oak Island, where he unloaded the treasure and some of his crew, before continuing on to England. Mordaunt and his men of war, on the other hand, sailed back to Holland, where they presented William III with the silver coins. Sometime between September 1688 and January 1689, Phips and his crew dug the money pit 210 feet deep, where they happened upon natural caverns in the anhydrite bedrock. While interring the treasure in these caverns, the diggers suffered a catastrophic underground failure, perhaps a blowout precipitating a flood of groundwater, which prevented recovery of the treasure. Phips and his crew sealed the money pit and left Oak Island, destroying all traces of their presence on the island, aside from the stone triangle on the South Shore Cove and a few drilled stones. Back in Europe, William III, having used Mordaunt's silver to strengthen his army and navy, successfully invaded England and assumed the British throne in what is known as the Glorious Revolution. Mordaunt, Narborough, and other officers involved in the treasure recovery plot which made his invasion possible were heaped with honors by the new king. In the ensuing years, King William III put together various clandestine engineering squads and sent them to Oak Island to retrieve the treasure. None of these groups was successful. Years later, in the 1750s, the British Crown decided that if the British Empire wasn't going to own the remaining treasure of the Concepcion, no one would. A company of British engineers and Cornish miners, headed by military engineer Lieutenant General John Henry Bastide and supplemented by soldiers of the 47th Regiment of Foot, was formed up, dispatched to Oak Island, and tasked with booby-trapping the money pit. First, the crew attempted to build a flood tunnel from the South Shore Cove to the money pit. The first exploratory shaft they sank in the area, however, indicated that the soil in the area was an unsuitable medium through which to construct a tunnel. The crew filled this shaft in and abandoned it, where it would, centuries later, be rediscovered by treasure hunter Robert Dunfield in the 1960s and named the South Shore Cove Shaft. The crew moved to Smith's Cove, where the soil conditions were much more favorable. After constructing a wooden cofferdam around the cove, they built the Smith's Cove box drains, the massive coconut fiber eelgrass filtration system, and the Smith's Cove flood tunnel. When they had completed their task, they erased all evidence of their presence on the island. There are a number of discoveries made on Oak Island over the years which are consistent with Harris and MacPhie's fascinating theory. One of these is the pickaxe discovered by Oak Island treasure hunters Chappells Limited in the 1930s. Experts have identified this implement as a pickaxe used by 16th and 17th century miners from Cornwall, England. Another artifact supporting Harris and MacPhie's theory is the wooden plank which Tony Sampson discovered in the swamp in Season 4, Episode 3. This item was carbon dated from 1680 to 1735, a range perfectly consistent with the William Phips theory. Other similarly congruent discoveries include the 3 wooden samples extracted from borehole T1 in Season 4, Episode 14, 2 of which were carbon dated from 1655 to 1695. The human bones discovered in the spoils of borehole H8 in Season 5, Episodes 5 and 6. The European bone was carbon dated from 1678 to 1764, while the Middle Eastern bone was carbon dated from 1682 to 1736. Both of these date ranges are consistent with the William Phips theory, and with the notion that Phipps's crew suffered a catastrophic underground failure while attempting to inter the treasure of the Concepcion in the money pit. The timber found at Smith's Cove in Season 5, Episode 16, which was carbon dated from 1684 to 1732. The wood from the money pit salvaged by Robert Dunfield's crane operator, Harold Bishop, and presented in Season 5, Episode 16 of The Curse of Oak Island. This piece proved to date from 1646 to 1690, a date range consistent with the William Phips theory. The rhodolite garnet brooch found on Oak Island's Lot 8 in Season 5, Episode 16, which an unnamed gemologist dated to the 16th or 17th century in the Season 5 finale. And the core samples which Dr. Ian Spooner and his graduate students extracted from the Oak Island swamp in Season 7, Episode 9, which led Dr. Spooner to deduce that human activity took place in the swamp between 1674 and 1700. Did William Phips and a crew of Cornish miners really inter the silver of the Concepcion in the money pit in the fall of 1688? The evidence is certainly promising, but until the Oak Island treasure is liberated from its subterranean tomb once and for all, Harris and MacPhie's thesis will remain one of the many fascinating, yet to be verified Oak Island theories.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would like to support this channel, please check out the Oak Island Encyclopedia by clicking the link in the description.